Well, good evening to each one of you. This has been a beautiful day. I hope you have enjoyed it. And I hope you slow down at some time during the day to say thank you to God. We take a lot for granted. We look at this time of the year and we see so many beautiful flowers. There are a lot of people that are blind and don't get to see that. We hear the children laughing, the dogs barking, and a lot of people can't hear. And we walked into this building tonight, but many people can't walk. If we will stop and think, then we should stop and thank. And I want to say a special thanks to this church for allowing me to be with you tonight in your summer series. That has become a real thing this year. I was just recently in Tampa, Florida, and there's one church that meets on Tuesday night, and another church meets on Wednesday night, and another church meets on Thursday night, and all three of them were having their summer series, and so I got to enjoy some of those classes. I appreciate your fellowship with me, your prayers for me. I just returned home from Honduras. Time to repack, do laundry, and get ready to go again. I'll soon be leaving this next trip. I go to Kenya. On the trip to Honduras, I took 5 Florida college girls with me where they could help teach the vacation Bible school for the children while I was working with the adults. And now this trip to Kenya, I'm taking 2 more Florida college girls, and they will also be conducting a VBS. And so I've worked, God has allowed me, I've taken over 100 people overseas. And I love doing that because I'm the oldest I've ever been before. And I don't know how long God's going to allow me to keep traveling. I'm going to keep on as long as I have the health to do it, and as long as I get the invitations from churches to come and do it. And but there's going to come a time that Bob's going to have to step out of the scene, and I've been trying to encourage other people, young and old. I did take an 86-year-old woman from Williams, Indiana, and she taught classes for teenage girls and classes for ladies. So I'm trying to work with every age and trying to encourage more people to be involved in evangelism. I love God, and I love the Bible. I love studying, and I love teaching. And I'm so happy that you allowed me to be a part of this summer series. And tonight, we're going to go all the way to the end of the Old Testament. We're going to go to that last book. And when we get down to that period at the end of Malachi, then for 400 years, there's going to be no more messages from God. There's going to be no more books written. There's no more prophets chosen. And so this book is sort of a special book. Malachi, I call it a messenger of God. And so we need to try to get a little bit of history in our mind. And I got a little scared there with Mike's prayer. I thought, well, we could say amen and go home. He just preached half of my sermon talking about the worship weariness. So we'll come back to that in just a moment, but let's real quickly just look at some of the history. With the aid of the prophetic ministries of Haggai and Zechariah, the temple was rebuilt. Now, I'm not going to have the time to go and read all. I'm just trying to refresh your memory on that. And then we see that what had begun in 536 BC was finally finished in 516. So we see how much time it took here. And in 458 BC, there was another group of exiles that returned to Jerusalem, led by Ezra, who was a priest, and he was working to teach the people. He was trying to preach. He was trying to get the people, let's get spiritual again. Let's be concerned about what God says. About 444 BC, a third group of exiles returned, led by Nehemiah, and Nehemiah later became governor. Now, I love studying the book of Nehemiah, and I always go to this book when I'm doing a series of lessons on prayer. Now, Bob, what does Nehemiah have to do with a series on prayer? Well, when he stood before the king, you know, there are some people that you can just look at them and know something is wrong, right? Now, you husbands and wives, you can see that in each other. You parents can see that in your children. And the king saw that in Nehemiah. He could look at it. There's something wrong. What's bothering you? Now understand that Nehemiah was a slave. He was the cup bearer, which what that meant is if you're going to give the king something to drink, the cup bearer sips it first to make sure it's not poison. If you're going to give him something to eat, then Nehemiah would be the one that would sample it to make sure it hasn't been poisoned. But if he didn't do his job properly, you could just snap your finger and say, have him killed. And so now the king looks at him and says, what's wrong with you? And here's what I love. The Bible records Nehemiah prayed and then answered. I do not believe he said, time out. Give me 15 minutes so I can go over here and get down on my knees and close my eyes and say a long prayer. This is what I call an arrow prayer. Probably just one sentence. God, please help me say the right thing. I've shot a lot of those arrows in my preaching life. When I lived in southern Indiana, I would cross the river to go into Louisville, and one of the churches there, 5 days a week, had a live call-in radio program. And the elders would often ask me to be on that program. The phone rings, you say, what is written? What is your question? There's no way to study for it. You don't know what they're going to ask you. And some of the questions can be a lot harder than some other questions. And so many times I just shoot up one of those quick arrows. Please help me say the right thing, God. So there's where we are here in our history, that Nehemiah, under his leadership, the walls of Jerusalem were rebuilt. Now, together with Ezra, he led the people to work and to try to return, to come back to God. Now, all of that is the history, and that now leads us to Malachi, because he was contemporary with Ezra and Nehemiah. His name simply means my messenger. So what was he supposed to do? He was a messenger of God, but he also spoke about God's messengers that would later come. You see, Malachi told us about the cousin of Jesus, John, a messenger. And then he ultimately then has us all prepped up about Jesus. But see, like Ezra the priest, Malachi attacked the spiritual and the moral decay that was prevalent. God's people weren't what God wanted them to be anymore. There was problems among the people. There were problems among the priest. And part of my letters are disappearing on my screen up here, so I don't know, maybe I chose the wrong font. But see, there was a style of preaching that is used in the book of Malachi that's a little unusual. Is that you would make a charge, and then you would raise a potential objection, and then you would try to refute them. Now that's a new way of teaching. And after Malachi introduces us to that, that later became quite common with the Jewish schools and in the Jewish synagogues. Now let's consider some of the examples in this book, the last book in the Old Testament. They were doubting God's love. It's hard for us in modern day America to comprehend, isn't it? Evidently, they were questioning, God, do you love us as much as you love Noah? Do you love us as much as you love Moses? Do you love us as much as you've loved some of these other men and women that we read about? They were beginning to question God's love after years of captivity. God, why did you allow us to be slaves? Especially to be taken by the Assyrians. Because the Assyrians were probably the cruelest group of humans that had ever lived. When the Assyrians would take captives, they just didn't say, well, put your hands out, we'll put handcuffs on you. They put a hook in the lower lip. And then they had a long pole with a hook on it. And they'd grab hold of that hook and they would drag you down the street like you were some kind of an animal. God, why did you allow that to happen? And so they were questioning here. So even though we can't agree with them, we might a little bit understand why they were feeling this way. God, do you not love us anymore? Now, their return from Babylonian captivity was not without difficulty. God reasserts his love. I've told you over and over and over again how much I love you. But you seem to forget. And so when we look at this new language that Malachi is using in his writing, first, he says, I have loved you. In what way have you loved us? Was not Esau Jacob's brother? Yet Jacob I have loved, but Esau I have hated. But then when we understand what is being said, God is speaking of Jacob and Esau as representative of two nations. He wasn't saying this person I hate, but he is saying what through this person, this nation came. And the evil that they did is what I hated. Now, when we talk about Esau, we have to talk about the Edomites. Now, I think that there are some here in the assembly tonight that have made trips over into the Bible lands. And you have been maybe to Petra, and you have gone through the Sig, and you can see then the caves on the side where the people lived. And they were quite arrogant because they thought, well, there's only one way to enter through this Sig. And I rode a camel going through that Sig, and it's one way for one person. And if you're up here on the bluff and you either got a bunch of rocks or you got a bow and arrow, you could prevent anybody else to coming into your city. And they were so arrogant. But then God said, oh, you dwellers of the cliff, I will bring you down. You see, we should never forget the power of the Creator God. And so the Edomites were used in this example because when he talked about Esau, that he hated Esau, it wasn't the person Esau, but the generations, the Edomites that came from Esau. They had become desolate. Despite their claims to the contrary, they thought they were really special God's people. But they were dishonoring God's name. Now, how are they doing that? Because when Malachi is giving this charge, you're dishonoring God. Well, how are we doing that? Well, you're breaking God's covenant. You're divorcing. God hates divorce. That's what Malachi said. God hates divorce. You're dishonoring God's covenant. You're not caring about the sacrifices. You're offering blemished sacrifices. You're offering half-hearted worship. Now that's where I got that title in the very beginning, Worship Weariness. Because they were saying, this is a burden. We did it last week. You mean we got to do it again this week? I wonder if ever in our weakness we have the same thoughts. We assembled last Sunday. We gave some money last Sunday. We had the Lord's Supper last Sunday. Oh, what a weariness it is. Now, some of you that have never stood in this pulpit, you don't realize what the preacher can see from this pulpit. I've seen people sitting out there as we're getting ready to pass the Lord's Supper and they're clipping their fingernails. But they'll put the clippers down just long enough to take the bread and then go back clipping again. I've seen people from the pulpit, and depending upon how high up you're holding your iPhone or your iPad, I can see which one of the games you're playing. You're not paying any attention about worshiping God. I've seen in some congregations, and I'm glad we've never seen it here, is that I've seen in some places where that when the songs are announced, some men and women don't sing. Have you seen that? Have you ever participated in that? Does worship become tiresome for you? I'm getting some nice pictures up here, but I don't know what they are. All right, here we go. We're back to the one I wanted to be. Some of their sons honored their fathers and their mothers, but they didn't honor God. When Malachi is trying to rebuke them out of love, because he's a messenger of God, when asked in what way have we not pleased God? And Malachi said, well, you are offering a sacrifice. We're not denying that. You're offering a sacrifice. But should we accept that? You're offering to God what you would be embarrassed to offer men. And the Lord even said, it'd be good if we just shut the doors. Quit pretending. Don't even come in with your sacrifice anymore. You're hypocritical. Oh, my prayer is that God would never feel that way about Bob. When we bow our head to pray, our Father who art in heaven, hallowed, holy is your name. I can't pray those words and then be playing on my phone with some app. I can't pray those words, holy is your name, and then not want to sing those songs. Now, what was it that God expected? I had to really search on the internet to find a sick lamb. But you look at that picture, and then when we study what God said he wanted, and if it's been a while since you read in Leviticus chapter 22, let's just go over it real fast. No defective animal. If this lamb, this sheep, this goat had got caught in the briars and they're all cut up and they're bleeding, don't offer that to God. If this one has been sick and has the scours, you don't offer that to God. It must be perfect in order to be accepted. You don't bring a blind animal. You don't bring one that's broken. You don't bring one that's maimed. I had the good opportunity. It took a lot of letter writing to ever get permission. But on one of my trips to Israel, I went up to Mount Gerizim, where the Samaritans live. And I watched them that day slaughter about 200 animals. I've never seen that much blood before. But as I was walking and watching and photographing, I thought, these animals are perfect. You see, that was what that the book of Leviticus is record that God wanted. He doesn't want one that has scabs or one that is bleeding or one that is sick in any other way. Moses even records that one leg could not be longer than the other leg. That would be a deformed animal. It's not to be bruised, not to be brushed and crushed in any way, not torn or cut. God was specific on what he wanted. But what were the people doing? They were giving God the leftovers. Do you think some of us do that sometime? Their worship had become a weariness. Malachi chapter 1, verse 13. God said, you might as well shut the doors. You might as well quit doing your sacrifices if that's what you're going to give me is the leftovers. If your attitude, well, this animal is sick, it's going to die soon, but right now it's still, the heart's still beating, so let's give that one to God. Look at what verse 13 says. You say, oh, what a weariness. And you sneer at it, says the Lord of hosts. You bring the stolen, the lame, the sick. Oh yeah, I'm not denying that you're bringing me an offering. I'm not denying that. You bring an offering, but should I accept this of you? I wonder if God ever looks down from his throne and says, now, that church doesn't use drums and horns and guitars and pianos and organs. They only sing a cappella. But they're not singing from the heart. They're not acting like they really love me. They don't sound like they really care about worshiping me. Oh, what a weariness it is. You see the problem they were having in Malachi's day? And what are people doing today? Just about anything that can make them feel good. Anything that satisfies man. And brothers and sisters and ladies and gentlemen, don't think it's just outside there in the denominational world. There is a Church of Christ up in the New England states that announced they wanted to make the Lord's Supper more meaningful and they could attract more teenagers if they converted the Lord's Supper to have hamburgers and Coca-Cola. Are we trying to please God and do things His way, or are we trying to please ourselves? Today, just about anything that tickles the ear or amuses us is being used by so many of the churches. The shouting, the clapping, the swaying with music, the bands they bring in. Some of them have choreography. You got to clap your hands and then jump 2 steps to the left and then clap and go 2 to the right, and then you got to kick one leg out. And they're doing all this choreography. I asked a lady, why does your church do that? Oh, we were getting bored. We wanted to liven things up. Isn't that what Malachi was saying? You're saying, oh, what a weariness this is. Are you bored having the Lord's Supper every Sunday? Now listen to me, my brethren. When we eat that little piece of bread and we drink that small amount of grape juice, that is not designed to fill up our stomach. It's designed to fill up our mind. We're supposed to be thinking about Jesus, and we're supposed to be thinking about the cross. And if it wasn't for that cross, I'd be headed to hell. And I should never get tired of thinking about that cross. And I should never get tired of saying, thank you. Now, we got several young people scattered around this building. And so I want to give a warning. I'm a friend to goldfish. But I want to warn the goldfish that they're in danger. There are some churches that are going to swallow you. Now, when I was preaching in southern Indiana, a church about 7 miles from where I was preaching advertised that if they broke the attendance record on Sunday morning, the song leader and the preacher were both going to swallow a live goldfish. Honestly, I'd like to have seen that dude do that. But that was for entertainment. Here's an article that appeared in the newspaper. Church agrees to stop the practice of swallowing live goldfish. Now, why did they do it in the first place? Because they were bored with the way God wanted it. They were bored with their prayers, and they were bored with their songs, and they were bored with the Bible lessons. So they wanted to entertain man. There is a large church in the city where I live at Bowling Green. They've got rain gutters along the side, and they come down in front of the pulpit. And at the appropriate time, someone can put a hunk of dry ice in each of the rain gutters, and it'll come around and then hits a pool of water in the front. And then that makes all this steam coming up. And then they have strobe lights. You see, it's like an amusement. But some people are falling for the devil's trap. Worship weariness is what Malachi called it. This was also a problem in the church at Corinth. We read about that in 1 Corinthians chapter 11. Some have to work to stay awake. Have you ever wrestled with that problem? Sometimes we're spiritually sick. Some are spiritually dead, according to what Paul said in 1 Corinthians 11. But worship should give you strength. Worship should keep you awake. We become weak when we worship improperly. We upset God when we worship improperly. But there are many different methods that are being used. Some people design their building just simply to make you feel good. There are some of the Pentecostal churches that are called holy rollers because they use music to get everyone emotionally excited, and then they run up and down the aisle screaming and hollering, believing they've been taught that that's the Holy Spirit working on them. They're tired of conventional worship. So we need to understand what to do about this. So in closing, let's offer some suggestions. What do I mean, preparation for worship? Do we wait until 10 minutes before it's time to leave the house to make sure the children have the clothes they're supposed to be wearing? Mommy, my socks are all dirty. The husband's worse than the children sometimes. Honey, where's my clean shirt? Why don't we lay everything out Saturday night? Do you know where your Bible is? Do you have a certain place you keep it? Do you use it every day? Or do you say, well, I know I had it last Sunday. It's somewhere in this house, but I don't know where I put it last Sunday. You haven't used it any during the week? And now Sunday morning you're running around trying to find your Bible? Because after all, we are going to go worship God. There needs to be preparation made. We need to eliminate as many of those problems as we can. I've heard of one family that they ran out of gasoline on the way to the church building. And so they didn't make it for Bible study. Why didn't you fill up with gas on Saturday? Eliminate a problem. Work at staying focused in worship. I'm really excited. A lot of the churches that I've visited in the last 2 or 3 years is that I was at one church, and I think the first 3 rows over here to my left was all little children. Mommy and Daddy wasn't sitting over here with them. These were children that knew how to behave, and the elders had given every one of them a sheet of paper, and you're supposed to write down how many times that the preacher uses the word God, or how many times he says Jesus, or how many times he says Bible. And then you're supposed to watch the PowerPoint sermon, and there's fill in the blank. And so, half of what is going to be on the PowerPoint is on their piece of paper, but there's one word missing here and one word missing, and they have to watch for that so they can fill the word in. I suggested to the elders, why don't you give a lot of the adults that paper to keep them awake? You see, we need to work at staying focused. I'm old-fashioned enough that I love to hear the pages turning in a paper Bible. I'm not opposed to the iPad and the iPhone. I know that they have some wonderful apps. I've got 27 different versions on my iPhone. It's a tool. It can be used. But the thing is, whether we're using that iPad, iPhone, or using the paper Bible, do we really follow along? Do we bring a little piece of paper so that we can take some notes? Do we say, that was a good point that was just made in that sermon? I want to think about that a little bit more when I get home. Now see, my forgetter works a whole lot stronger than my rememberer. And so I need sometimes to make myself a note, because during that sermon I said, now I want to study some more about that, or I want to think about that a little bit more. But then I get home and I forget what was that point that I wanted to remember. So I need to write that down. So we need to work at staying focused. But we need to practice. Practice staying focused. I'm not going to ask anyone to raise their hand. I wouldn't want to embarrass anybody. What were the 2 songs that we sang before I walked up here? Did you pay attention to what we were singing? Did the words mean something to you? You got a good song leader. He pitched it well for us. He kept it going. Did we do our part? He did his. Did we do our part? See, that's why we call him the leader. He's not up here to be the soloist. He's up here to work with us. And you know, it might be possible that sometimes what I'm complaining about is the preacher's fault. Now let me explain that, David. Sometimes the preacher will get up here, boy, we got a good-looking audience today. And what are they talking about? They're usually talking about you, the people sitting out there in the pew. Ladies and gentlemen, you are not the audience. You are the participants. God is the audience. God is the one that's listening to our prayers and listening to our sermons and listening to the songs that we sing. We are the participants. We're to be lifting our voices in praise to Him on the throne. Now, if we can train ourselves to understand God is watching, God is listening. God is watching, God is listening. And I wonder how many times God looks down from His throne to say, I wonder why that those 3 brothers are not singing. I wonder why that those 2 sisters haven't even opened the songbook. You see, we can work at doing a better job with what we're trying to do in worshiping God. We can help prepare the children and teaching more classes at home. You can learn. The children are learning the 17 divisions of Bible history. Adults need to learn that also. And we need to remember that worship is a privilege. Now, when we study a book like Malachi, there is a message for the present, and there's a message for the future. Malachi was saying, look inward. He was exhorting the people to look at themselves. Now, if we were all in a classroom, and if you knew me well, like many of you do, we have several people here tonight that attended Western Kentucky University, and they attended the church where I preached for 18 years. And so if we were to pass out a piece of paper and say, okay, everybody write down Bob's faults and mistakes, some might say, can I have a second piece of paper? But what if the elders gave us a piece of paper and said, now each one of you write down 6 of your faults? Write down some of your weaknesses. Write down where you need to improve, where you need encouragement, where you want your family, the church, to help you. You see, Malachi was encouraging the people to look forward to the coming of God's messenger, John. But then to look beyond that to the messenger of the covenant, Jesus. Oh, what a weariness it is. Malachi was trying to wake the people up. And maybe we need that tonight, to wake up. And maybe tonight we need a spiritual revival. And maybe tonight we need to apologize to God. God, I wear the name Christian, but I don't always act like one. And maybe at our worship now, we want to make sure we do this, and we don't do this, we don't add this. But do we really put our heart into what we're doing? I hope that something that has been said tonight from Malachi will encourage us to do better and to be better. But it could be that there's someone here tonight that is not yet a Christian. Let me close by saying this. Any weak person can be a sinner. Any weak person can be a sinner. Doesn't take much to follow the crowd. Doesn't take much to go with the guys down to the bar. Doesn't take much to laugh at their filthy jokes. But you see, God is looking for somebody that can be strong. God is looking for somebody that can say, okay, I'm going to leave the world. I'm going to leave the devil. I'm going to become a Christian. And I want the world to see the change in me. And that I want to be a light to a dark world. Any dead fish can float downstream. But it takes a live one to swim back up. Any weak person can occupy a pew. But it takes a strong Christian to make a difference. I can go and sit in the chicken house all day long. That's not going to make me a rooster. And I can sit on that pew every Sunday. And that's not going to make me a strong Christian. The change has to take place on the inside. Do you understand what I'm saying? God never promised you a rose garden. He promised you a battlefield. He never promised that if you become a Christian, the world's going to sing 3 verses, for he's a jolly good fellow. He promised you that the world would hate you. Do you have what it takes to say, I'm ready? I'm going to leave the world and I'm going to follow Jesus. If you've never done that, we would rejoice to witness your baptism tonight. Or if in times past you did that, you got started on your journey with the Lord. You were good for a few weeks or a few months or maybe even a few years, but something happened. You've gotten off the path. It could be that somebody discouraged you, somebody disappointed you. It could have been sickness, it could have been death. And you know that you're just not what you used to be. Somebody said, after receiving an invitation, would like to have you to visit us at the Church of Christ. And he said, oh no, I can't come because all of those people are perfect. You need to come. You don't know those people. We're not claiming to be perfect, but we're claiming to try. And we're claiming that we will admit when we fall, when we fail. We will admit when we need somebody to encourage us and somebody to forgive us. It could be that there's somebody here tonight as a Christian that says, Bob, my life is a mess. It's just like a bunch of broken eggshells. And God says, give me all the broken pieces and I'll put you back together again. Would you like to start all over? We're going to sing this song to try to encourage you. If you're not a Christian, we'd love for you to become one. If you're a Christian that know that you've not been what you ought to be, we'd be happy to pray with you tonight. And Bob is one person that doesn't believe in generic prayers. If there's someone tonight that wanted to walk before this church and said, pray for me, I would encourage whoever's going to lead that prayer to use the name of that brother or that sister as we approach God's throne. Let us know if there's any way that we can help you while together we stand and sing.